The rain had been falling on London for 3 days without mercy when the woman in the black veil came to see Hercule Poirot. I remember the morning with particular clarity because I had been attempting, with very little success, to persuade my friend to take an interest in a case reported in the morning papers. The theft of a Gainsborough from the home of a minor baronet in Hampshire, and Poirot had dismissed it with a wave of his hand and a remark that any man who could not protect a Gainsborough deserved to lose one. He was seated in his usual chair, his breakfast tray arranged upon the table with the geometrical precision that would have satisfied Euclid. His egg, untouched, occupied the exact center of its plate. His toast, cut into soldiers of identical dimension, stood in a silver rack like guardsmen on parade. The coffee, prepared to his exacting specification by our long-suffering landlady, Mrs. Lemon, sent up a thread of steam that rose with the obedience of incense in a still church. "There is nothing in this case, Hastings," he said without looking up from the arrangement of his marmalade pot, which he was adjusting by fractions of an inch. "A man who hangs a Gainsborough in a corridor where the servants pass with coal scuttles is not the victim of a thief. He is the victim of his own vulgarity. The painting was taken by someone who loved it more than he did, and that someone will be found in the nearest auction house within a fortnight." I was about to reply, rather sharply, for his dismissal stung my journalistic instincts, when the doorbell rang. Poirot's head lifted, his nostrils, if I may put it that way, quivered. "Ah," he said, "you can't possibly know who that is." "I know that the bell was pulled with the left hand." "How on earth?" "The vibration, Hastings. It is shorter on the left side. Also, the pause before the pull was long. A person who hesitates at a door is a person who has almost turned away. They are coming not because they wish to, but because they have exhausted every other possibility. This will be interesting." It was Mrs. Lemon who showed her in, a woman of perhaps 40, dressed entirely in black, her face concealed behind a mourning veil of such density that one could see only the pale suggestion of features beneath. She moved with the careful deliberation as of one who has learned to carry grief without spilling it, and when she sat in the chair Poirot offered, she arranged herself with a neatness that spoke of good breeding and long practice in rooms where one is observed. "Monsieur Poirot," she said. Her voice was low, educated, with a faint continental inflection I could not immediately place. "I have come because a man I trusted told me, before he died, that if the world ever closed its doors, yours would remain open." Poirot inclined his head. "And who was this man, madame?" "My husband, Sir Charles Dorrington. He was the British attaché to the Dorrington legation in Vienna. He died 6 weeks ago in our home in Eaton Square." She paused. The coroner ruled it heart failure. The Foreign Office was satisfied. The newspapers printed 40 words and moved to the football results. Everyone, Monsieur Poirot, everyone has accepted that Charles died of a weak heart. "And you, madame?" The veil trembled. "I believe he was murdered." There was a silence in which the rain drew its thin lines down the window and the fire in the grate shifted with the small collapse of a coal. "The murdered wife," Poirot murmured. Not unkindly, but with the directness that is his nature. "Forgive me, madame. You understand that many wives have sat in that chair and said the same. Grief, it distorts. The mind, so accustomed to the presence of the beloved, cannot accept that the body, which it knows so intimately, could simply stop. I am aware of how I sound." The woman's voice hardened. A thread of iron entered it, and I found myself revising my estimate. This was not a woman crushed by sorrow. This was a woman held together by it, as wire holds a fence. "I did not come to weep, monsieur. I came to present facts, 3 of them." "Then present them, madame." "Hercule Poirot, he listens." She drew a breath. "First, on the night Charles died, his study was locked from the inside. When the servants broke the door, he was at his desk, his pen still in his hand, a letter half written before him. The letter was addressed to the Foreign Secretary. It contained one sentence. I can no longer keep silent about what happened in Vienna. The rest of the page was blank. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this letter, where is it now? Gone? Removed from the desk between the discovery of the body and the arrival of the police. I saw it. The housekeeper saw it. By morning it had vanished. The second fact, madame. Charles had been taking a tonic prescribed by Dr. Ellsworth Greaves, his physician for 15 years. 3 days before his death he told me, and I remember his words exactly. The tonic tastes wrong, Margaret, like pennies. He said it lightly, as one complains about weather, but he was afraid. I saw it in his hands. They trembled when he held the glass. And the third. She lifted her veil. The face beneath was handsome rather than beautiful. Strong bones, clear eyes of a remarkable grey-green, a mouth that had been generous and was now held in the thin line of someone who has decided upon a course. But it was the mark I noticed. Along her left jaw, fading but unmistakable, ran a bruise the colour and shape of a man's thumb. 3 nights before Charles died, she said, a man came to our house, uninvited. He and Charles quarrelled in the study. I heard shouting. Charles never shouted. And then a crash. When I entered, the man was gone. Charles told me it was nothing. A colleague. A disagreement about policy. But the window was open, a chair overturned, and this, she touched her jaw, was where Charles gripped me when I tried to follow the man into the garden. Charles did this to you? He seized me to prevent me from going after the intruder. He was terrified, Monsieur Poirot. Not angry, terrified. He said, "If that man sees your face, Margaret, you are in danger." I had never known him afraid of anything. He had served in places where men carried revolvers as casually as fountain pens. And yet that night, in his own house, in Eaton Square, he was white with fear. Poirot was silent for a moment. Then he rose, crossed to the window, and stood looking out at the rain as though consulting it. "Madame Dorrington," he said at last, without turning, "your husband served in Vienna from 1929 to 1934. He was recalled to London and given a desk at the Foreign Office. 2 years ago, he retired. He was knighted for services rendered. Services that were described in the official citation with the magnificent vagueness that is the English genius for saying nothing while appearing to say everything." Lady Dorrington stiffened. "You know all this." I read. I remember. It is both my gift and my punishment. He turned. Sir Charles Dorrington was involved in intelligence work. This is not a secret. It is merely an unspoken truth, the kind of truth that is understood by everyone and acknowledged by no one. The question is, what happened in Vienna that could not be spoken of even in retirement, even in safety, even in the privacy of a letter to the Foreign Secretary? "That," said Lady Dorrington, "is what I want you to discover." Poirot studied her for several seconds. I had seen him refuse cases with far more obvious merit. I had seen him accept cases that appeared trivial and proved to be anything but. His criteria, as I have often noted, were entirely his own. "I will require 3 things," he said. "Access to Sir Charles's study, untouched if possible. A list of every person who entered Eaton Square in the fortnight before his death, and the name of the colleague with whom he quarrelled. The study has been locked since the funeral. I have the key. The household diary will provide your list. And the name." Lady Dorrington's composure, which had been formidable, trembled at the edges. I did not see his face, but I heard Charles call him by name as he went through the window. He said, and I will never forget the way he said it, as though the word itself were poison. He said, "Kessler." The effect upon Poirot was electric. I had seen it before, that sudden brightening of the eye, that infinitesimal straightening of the frame, as though every cell in his body had simultaneously received news of the highest importance. "Kessler," he repeated. "You are certain?" "Absolutely." Poirot reached for his hat and his stick. "Come, Hastings, we go to Eaton Square, at once, before the rain washes away what remains." In the taxi, he was silent. This was not unusual. Poirot thinks as other men breathe, continuously and without announcement. But there was a quality to this silence that disturbed me. It was the silence of a man who has recognized a scent he hoped never to encounter again. "Who is Kessler?" I asked. "A ghost, Hastings. A rumor, a name that appeared in certain files during the last years of the Austrian crisis, and then disappeared as completely as if it had never been. Intelligence? Of a kind. There were those who believed Kessler was an agent of considerable skill who operated in Vienna between the wars, selling information to whichever government paid the most. British, French, Austrian. It did not matter. He was, if the stories are true, responsible for the exposure of at least 4 intelligence officers, 2 of whom were subsequently killed. Good Lord. And Sir Charles Dorrington, who served in Vienna during precisely those years, who was involved in precisely those operations, apparently knew this man well enough to call him by name, and feared him enough to die rather than speak of what passed between them. The taxi turned into Eaton Square. The houses rose white and imposing, their stucco facades washed by the rain into a severity that matched the occasion. Number 14 stood at the far corner, distinguished from its neighbors only by the drawn curtains and the faint suggestion of neglect. A letterbox not emptied, a step not recently swept, that marks a house in mourning. Lady Dorrington admitted us through the tradesman's entrance, which struck me as curious until she explained that the front door was being watched. "By whom?" I demanded. "I don't know. A man has been standing in the garden square for 3 days, reading a newspaper. He never turns the page. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Then he reads slowly, or he reads us. Either way, we will give him nothing to report." The study of Sir Charles Dorrington occupied the first-floor rear, overlooking a small walled garden now sodden with autumn rain. It was a diplomat's room, orderly, impersonal, the shelves lined with works of international law and bound volumes of Hansard. A desk of dark walnut occupied the center, its surface bare except for a leather blotter, an inkstand, and a brass lamp. The chair behind the desk was pushed back at an angle, as though its occupant had risen suddenly. "Nothing has been moved?" Poirot asked. "Nothing. I locked the door the morning after the funeral and have not opened it since." Poirot began his examination. I knew the signs. The slow, methodical sweep of the room, eyes first, hands after. He moved like a man reading a page, left to right, top to bottom, missing nothing. The desk first. He opened each drawer, examined its contents, closed it again. Papers, but not many. A check-book. A diary in which appointments were recorded in a small, disciplined hand. A box of Turkish cigarettes half empty. A magnifying glass, which Poirot regarded with professional respect before setting it aside. "The letter?" he murmured. "The one that vanished. It was here, you say?" "On the blotter. I saw it when I first entered the room." Poirot bent over the blotter with the attention of a man examining a fresco. "Ah, you see, Hastings, the impression, the pen pressed hard, the hand of a man writing with urgency, perhaps with anger. I can no longer keep silent about what happened in Vienna. One can read it here, reversed but legible." He straightened, and the person who removed the letter did not think to take the blotter. "This tells us something. They acted in haste. They knew the letter existed but did not anticipate the impression." He moved to the window. It was a sash window giving on to the garden, and it opened with the ease of a thing accustomed to being used. "The intruder, Kessler. He left through here." Charles said so. Poirot examined the sill. Mud. Dried but present. A shoe, narrow, continental in make. And here, a thread caught upon the hinge. Dark fabric, fine wool. He produced an envelope from his pocket. He carries them always, along with tweezers, a magnifying glass, and a small tape measure, the tools of his peculiar trade, and collected the thread. The chair that was overturned. Which one? Lady Dorrington indicated a leather armchair near the fireplace. It had been righted but bore a scratch on its arm where it had struck the fender. Poirot knelt. From the carpet beneath the chair, he extracted with his tweezers a single object so small I had to lean close to see it. It was a button. Not English. The thread was wound in the continental fashion, counterclockwise. The button itself was covered in dark grey fabric, the kind used on a well-tailored overcoat. Kessler's coat, I said. Or someone's coat. We must not run ahead of our evidence. But the gleam in his eye told me he was satisfied. He completed his circuit of the room, examining the bookcase, where a volume on Austrian diplomatic protocol had been removed and replaced upside down, the fireplace, in which a quantity of ash suggested papers recently burned, and the carpet, on which his trained eye detected what mine could not, a faint discoloration near the desk that he declared to be the residue of spilled liquid, perhaps a drink, perhaps something else. At last he stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, and addressed Lady Dorrington with the gravity that precedes one of his pronouncements. "Madame, your husband was a man of method. This room tells me so. Every book has its place. Every paper is filed. The disorder you described, the overturned chair, the open window, was profoundly out of character. This was not a disagreement about policy. This was a confrontation between two men who shared a secret, and one of them had decided that the secret must die." "And the tonic?" Poirot's face darkened. "The tonic, yes. The metallic taste. Like pennies," he said. "There are compounds, madame. Compounds of antimony, of thallium, that produce precisely this sensation. They are slow in their work. They mimic the heart's natural failure. A physician who was not looking for poison would not find it. Dr. Greaves would never. Dr. Greaves prescribed the tonic. He did not necessarily prepare it. Who collects the prescription? Who brings the bottle to Sir Charles's bedside?" Lady Dorrington's face went very still. "Fenton. Charles's valet. He has been with us for 12 years. Then we must speak with Fenton, and with Dr. Greaves, and with whoever occupies the garden square with a newspaper that is never turned." Poirot moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more question, madame. Sir Charles's diary records an appointment 3 days before his death. The entry reads simply, H 4 o'clock. The Savoy. Private. Do you know who H might be?" Lady Dorrington shook her head. "Charles had many acquaintances. Most of them I never met. Then we must discover who H is, and whether H is still alive." We returned to Eaton Square the following morning to interview the household staff. The rain had ceased, replaced by a cold October sun that turned the wet pavements to mirrors and made the houses of Eaton Square look like illustrations in a book of English propriety. Lady Dorrington had assembled them in the morning room. A butler named Hargreaves, the cook Mrs. Phelps, 2 housemaids, and the valet, Arthur Fenton. It was Fenton I studied most closely, for it is often the valet who knows a man better than his wife. Fenton was perhaps 50, lean and precise, with the careful hands and watchful eyes of one whose profession is anticipation. He stood very straight, and his face, when Poirot addressed him, wore the expression of a man prepared to be helpful, but determined to reveal nothing that was not specifically requested. "Monsieur Fenton," Poirot began, settling into a chair with the air of a man settling into a conversation that may last some time. "You served Sir Charles for 12 years. 13 in March, sir, since his posting to Madrid. You attended to his personal needs, his wardrobe, his meals, his medicine." "Yes, sir." "The tonic prescribed by Dr. Greaves. You collected it from the chemist." "I did, sir. Billings and Son, Sloane Street. The same chemist Sir Charles has used for 20 years. And you brought it to his room each evening?" "At precisely 9 o'clock, sir. 2 tablespoons in a measure glass. Sir Charles was particular about the routine. Did you ever taste the tonic yourself? Fenton blinked. Certainly not, sir. But you handled the bottle. You noticed nothing unusual. No change in color, in consistency. The valet hesitated. And the hesitation, though brief, was as audible to Poirot as a shout. Aye, there was an evening, sir. Perhaps 10 days before Sir Charles passed. The bottle was nearly empty, and I opened a new one from the cupboard. The color seemed fractionally darker. I mentioned it to Sir Charles. He said it was a different batch. I thought nothing more of it. This darker bottle, where is it now? In the medicine cupboard in Sir Charles's dressing room, I should think. You did not discard it? No, sir. There was still a quantity remaining. Poirot looked at me with the expression of a man whose prayers have been unexpectedly answered. Hastings, we will examine that bottle. But first, he turned back to Fenton. The night of the quarrel, the visitor who came uninvited. Did you see him? Fenton's composure wavered. I opened the door to him, sir. You opened the door, then you saw his face. Yes, sir. Describe him. Tall, sir, thinly built, a foreign gentleman, I would say. His coat was very good, continental tailoring. He wore no hat, which I found irregular in a gentleman calling at that hour. His hair was dark, going grey at the temples. He had a scar, very fine, almost invisible, running from the corner of his left eye to the cheekbone. He gave a name. He said, "Tell Sir Charles that an old friend from the Ringstrasse wishes to see him." The Ringstrasse is a street in Vienna, I believe. It is the principal boulevard. You conveyed this message? I did, sir. Sir Charles was in the study. When I told him, his face... Fenton stopped. For the first time, the professional mask slipped entirely, and I saw beneath it a man who had cared for his employer and was haunted by what he had witnessed. His face went the color of chalk, sir. He gripped the desk as though the floor had moved. Then he said, very quietly, "Show him in, Fenton, and then go to bed. Do not come downstairs again tonight, whatever you hear." And you obeyed? I showed the gentleman to the study and retired to my room. I did not sleep, sir. I heard voices, raised voices, and then a crash. I very nearly came down, but Sir Charles had been explicit. How long did the visitor remain? Perhaps 40 minutes. I heard the front door close at approximately 11:30. The front door, not the window. Fenton looked confused. The front door, sir. I'm certain. The latch has a distinctive sound. Poirot's eyebrows performed a small, expressive dance. Interesting. Lady Dorrington tells us the visitor left through the study window. You tell us he left through the front door. Both cannot be true, unless, of course, there were 2 departures. The implication hung in the air like smoke. We examined the medicine cupboard next. It was a small cabinet in Sir Charles' dressing room, locked with a key that Fenton produced from his waistcoat pocket. Inside, arranged with the order that characterized everything in the dead man's life, stood bottles of various preparations: aspirin, bicarbonate, a sleeping draught, and the tonic. Poirot lifted the tonic bottle, 3/4 full, and held it to the light. He uncorked it and sniffed with the delicate precision of a sommelier. "Hastings," he said, "your impression." I leaned close. The smell was medicinal, unremarkable, but beneath it, very faint, something metallic, something that did not belong. "It smells of iron," I said, "or copper." "Antimony," Poirot said quietly. "In solution. A slow poison, Hastings. Administered over weeks, it produces symptoms indistinguishable from cardiac failure. Nausea, weakness, arrhythmia. A physician who is not looking for it will see only a failing heart. Then we have our proof. We have our poison. Proof is a longer road." He recorked the bottle and wrapped it carefully in his handkerchief. "This must go to a chemist for analysis. I know a man, discreet, thorough. In the meantime, we must determine who had access to this cupboard." Fenton, recalled, confirmed that only he and Sir Charles possessed keys, but he added, with the reluctance of a man betraying a confidence, that the cupboard lock was old and simple, the kind that any determined person with a hairpin might open. "And who enters this dressing room besides yourself?" "The housemaid Ellen for cleaning. Lady Dorrington occasionally. And—" He paused. "And?" "Dr. Greaves, sir. He examined Sir Charles here on several occasions. He would have been alone in the room while Sir Charles dressed." Poirot nodded slowly. "One more question, Fenton. The morning after Sir Charles's death, before the police arrived, was anyone in the study alone?" The valet's eyes flickered. "Dr. Greaves arrived first, sir. He pronounced death and spent some time alone with the body before the police were summoned. Perhaps 20 minutes. 20 minutes, Poirot repeated. Long enough to find a letter and remove it. The entry in Sir Charles' diary, H 4 o'clock. The Savoy, private, occupied Poirot's mind for the remainder of that day. He sat in his chair at our lodgings, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed, in that state of concentrated thought that I had learned to respect and not interrupt. At last, he stirred. "Hastings, we must discover who H is. The diary does not help. The entry is cryptic, but the Savoy keeps records. One does not take tea at the Savoy without leaving a trace." The Savoy's head of reception, a man of magnificent discretion named Fairweather, was reluctant to assist until Poirot mentioned, with devastating casualness, a small matter involving a misplaced diamond bracelet that he had resolved for the hotel some years previously. The records were produced. Sir Charles Dorrington had reserved a private sitting room on the afternoon in question. The booking was in his name. The guest, registered at the desk as was customary, was listed as Mrs. Helena Voss. "Helena Voss," I said. "H." "Helena," Poirot repeated, tasting the name. "A woman. Sir Charles met a woman 3 days before his death, in secret in a private room. And the H in his diary disguised her identity even from the pages of his own journal. A mistress, perhaps, or perhaps something far more dangerous than a mistress." He made inquiries. Helena Voss was not, as it turned out, difficult to find. She occupied a suite at the Langham Hotel, registered there for the past 2 months. A widow, the hotel staff reported. Austrian. Quiet, well-mannered, generous with tips. She went out infrequently, received no visitors, and spent her evenings reading in the hotel library. We called upon her that afternoon. The woman who received us was perhaps 45, slender, with dark hair arranged simply and a face that had been beautiful and was now striking in a way that beauty alone cannot achieve. There was intelligence in it, and suffering, and a watchfulness that reminded me, with a start, of Poirot himself. She received us in her sitting room with a composure that bordered on resignation. "I've been expecting you," she said. "Or someone like you. Charles told me that if anything happened to him, a man would come asking questions. He said the man would be small, precise, and Belgian, and that I should tell him the truth." Poirot permitted himself a small, gratified smile. "Then Sir Charles knew me better than I knew him. Madame Voss, you met Sir Charles at the Savoy 3 days before his death. What passed between you?" She gestured for us to sit. The room was simply furnished, hotel furniture, impersonal, but she had placed a small vase of white roses on the writing desk, and beside it a framed photograph of a man in Austrian military uniform. "My husband," she said, following my gaze. "Colonel Friedrich Voss. He was killed in 1934, shot in the street in Vienna by men who were never identified." Her voice was steady, but her hand, resting on the arm of her chair, tightened. "And his death, it connects to Sir Charles?" "It connects to everything." She drew a breath. I must go back, Monsieur Poirot, to Vienna, to 1932. You understand, the world was changing. Austria was not yet absorbed, but the pressure was mounting. The intelligence services, British, French, German, Austrian, were all active. Alliances shifted daily. And in the middle of it all was a man who sold secrets to everyone and belonged to no one. Kessler, Poirot said. Her reaction confirmed what I had suspected. The name struck her like a physical blow. She recovered quickly, but the color had left her face. You know the name. I know the name. I do not know the man. Few do. Kessler, it is not his real name, of course, operated in Vienna for years. He cultivated relationships with intelligence officers of every nationality. He gathered secrets the way other men gather stamps, methodically, patiently, with an eye for value. He sold what he learned to the highest bidder. He was responsible for the exposure and death of at least 5 agents that I know of, including your husband. My husband discovered Kessler's identity. He told 2 people, Charles Dorrington, who was his friend and contact in British intelligence, and a colleague in Austrian military intelligence. Within a week, Friedrich was dead, and the Austrian colleague had vanished. And Dorrington. Charles was recalled to London almost immediately. The British closed their Vienna operation. Kessler disappeared. For years, I believed he was dead or in hiding. But 6 months ago, I received a letter, unsigned, but in a hand I recognized. It contained a single sentence. The debts of Vienna are not yet settled. You came to London. I came to warn Charles. I had reason to believe Kessler was here, operating under a new identity. I had fragments of information, a description from a source in Zurich, a rumor from an old colleague. And you told Sir Charles all this at the Savoy? I told him everything. He was shaken. He said he had suspected for some time that someone was watching him, following him. He said the tonic tasted wrong. He said he had decided to write to the Foreign Secretary and reveal everything. The Vienna operation, Kessler's identity, the failures that had led to Friedrich's death. He knew Kessler's real identity. Helena Voss looked at Poirot with an expression I shall not forget. A mixture of despair and resolution, as though she were about to step off a cliff and had made her peace with it. Charles told me that Kessler was not a stranger. He was not some shadowy foreign agent operating at the margins. He was someone inside the British establishment, someone who had been trusted, promoted, honored, someone whose betrayal went back decades. He gave you the name? He began to. He said, the man who calls himself Kessler is... And then he stopped. He looked at me, and I saw the fear again, the same fear Lady Dorrington must have seen. And he said, not here, not yet. I will put it in writing. If anything happens to me, Margaret will know where to find it. And 3 days later, he was dead. 3 days later, she said, the most decent man I ever knew was murdered in his own study, and the letter he was writing vanished as though it had never existed. The chemical analysis of Sir Charles's tonic arrived the following morning. I will not trouble you with the technical details. Poirot, who understands these matters far better than I, read the report with a satisfaction that was almost indecent. Antimony potassium tartrate, he announced, also known as tartar emetic, administered in small, regular doses over a period of approximately 4 to 6 weeks. The symptoms, nausea, cardiac arrhythmia, progressive weakness, would be consistent with the diagnosis of heart failure offered by Dr. Greaves. Then Greaves is either incompetent or complicit. Those are the alternatives, yes. Poirot set down the report. We visit Dr. Greaves this morning. Dr. Ellsworth Greaves maintained a practice in Harley Street, as one might expect of a physician whose patients included diplomats and civil servants. His consulting room was paneled in oak, hung with certificates of distinction, and furnished with the heavy, reassuring furniture that makes a patient feel they are in capable hands even before the examination begins. The doctor himself was a large man, not fat but broad, with a leonine head of silver hair and hands that seemed too big for the delicate business of medicine. He was perhaps 60, vigorous, with the ruddy complexion of a man who enjoys country weekends and good wine. He received us with the professional warmth of one accustomed to receiving anyone, though I detected, beneath the bonhomie, a wariness that sharpened when Poirot introduced himself. "Monsieur Poirot, I know the name, of course. You're here about poor Dorrington, I expect." "About his death, Dr. Greaves, and about your diagnosis." The warmth cooled by several degrees. "Heart failure, I was quite certain. Sir Charles had a history of cardiac irregularity dating back to his time in the tropics. I treated him for it for 15 years. "And the tonic you prescribed?" "A standard preparation, iron, quinine, strychnine in therapeutic doses. Nothing unusual." Poirot produced the analysis report and laid it on the desk between them. "Dr. Greaves, the tonic taken from Sir Charles's medicine cupboard contains antimony potassium tartrate. This is not a standard preparation. It is a poison." The doctor's reaction was, I must confess, entirely convincing. His face drained of color. His hands, those enormous, capable hands, trembled. "That's impossible," he said. "I prescribed—" "The chemist. Billings has been making up my prescriptions for decades. There must be an error." "There is no error. The analysis was conducted by Dr. Fernandez of the Royal Society. His reputation, I think, is beyond question." Greaves sank into his chair. He looked suddenly old. "Antimony," he repeated. "Good God. The symptoms, the metallic taste, the cardiac episodes. It would explain everything. I should have considered, but one doesn't expect. In one's own patient, you do not expect poison," Poirot said gently. "That is precisely what makes it effective. But who? Who would have done this? That is what we must determine. Dr. Greaves, think carefully. Who knew the details of Sir Charles's prescription? The preparation, the dosage, the routine?" "I knew, of course. My secretary has the files. The chemist, Billings. Lady Dorrington knew the general nature of the treatment. The valet, Fenton, administered it. And the new bottle, the one that was darker in color. Did you prescribe a change in formulation?" "Certainly not. If the bottle was different, it was not from my prescription." "Then someone substituted a prepared bottle for the legitimate one. Someone who had access to the medicine cupboard and knowledge of the routine." Greaves shook his head slowly. "It beggars belief. He was not the sort of man who makes enemies casually. He was cautious, methodical, discreet. And yet he made at least one enemy," Poirot observed, "an enemy who followed him from Vienna to London and waited, with extraordinary patience, for the moment to strike." Something crossed the doctor's face. A shadow, a flicker of recognition. And then it was gone, replaced by the professional mask. "I cannot help you further, Monsieur Poirot. I prescribed a tonic. What happened to it between my consulting room and Sir Charles' bedside is beyond my knowledge." But Poirot was not finished. "One more question, Dr. Greaves. On the morning Sir Charles was found dead, you were called to the house. You spent 20 minutes alone with the body before the police arrived." "To conduct my examination, naturally." "Naturally. And during this examination, did you observe a letter on the desk?" The doctor's hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It was enough. There were papers. I didn't examine them. My attention was on my patient." "Your dead patient?" Yes." Poirot rose. "You will forgive me, Dr. Greaves, but I do not believe you. I believe you saw the letter. I believe you read it. And I believe you removed it. The question I have not yet answered is whether you did so to protect Sir Charles' reputation, to protect your own, or to protect someone else entirely." The doctor said nothing. His face had become a mask of its own, and beneath it I thought I saw not guilt precisely, but the terrible burden of a man who knows more than he can say. We must, I think, acknowledge that it was I, Hastings, who made the breakthrough, though Poirot, in his characteristic fashion, later claimed to have anticipated it. The man in the garden square had been troubling me. Lady Dorrington reported him, the household had noticed him, and yet no one had thought to simply walk up and ask him what he was doing. The English, I reflected, have an extraordinary reluctance to confront a stranger in a public space, as though the mere act of sitting on a bench conferred upon a person the inviolability of a bishop. I'm not so burdened. I went to the square that afternoon, armed with nothing more than my walking stick and a healthy curiosity, and sat down on the bench next to him. He was, as described, a man with a newspaper. He was perhaps 50, neatly dressed in a dark overcoat of continental cut, with a narrow face, sharp cheekbones, and eyes of a pale blue that seemed to register everything while revealing nothing. He did not look up when I sat. "Filthy weather," I said. "Tolerably so," he replied. His accent was faint, German or Austrian, smoothed by years of practice. "You seem to find this particular bench agreeable. I've noticed you here several days running." For the first time he turned. His regard was cool, appraising. "And you are Captain Hastings, the associate of Monsieur Poirot." I confess I was startled. "You know my name." "I know a great deal, Captain. It is, as they say, my profession." He folded the newspaper, which I now saw was in German, and placed it beside him. "I was wondering when one of you would come to speak with me. I'd hoped it would be Poirot himself, but you will do. You wanted to be found. I wanted to be noticed. There is a difference. A man who watches a house wishes to be invisible. A man who watches a house while reading a German newspaper in Eaton Square wishes to be seen. I have been sending a message, Captain. The message is, I am here. I know what happened, and I am waiting." "Waiting for what?" He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "For someone inside that house to make a mistake." "Who are you?" He reached into his coat and produced a card. I took it. The name read, Joseph Brandt, private consultant. No address, no telephone number. "Brandt is not your real name," I said. "No more than Kessler is the name you are looking for." The effect of the word was like a pistol shot. I stiffened. He observed my reaction with the clinical interest of a scientist. "You know about Kessler." "I knew him in Vienna. We were colleagues of a sort. We worked in the same shadows, served the same uncertain masters. But our methods diverged. I collected information to protect lives. Kessler collected it to destroy them." "And Sir Charles Dorrington?" Brandt's expression changed. The mask of professional detachment slipped, and beneath it I saw something unexpected. Grief. Real grief, of the kind that does not perform for an audience. "Charles was a good man in a bad profession," he said quietly. "He tried to do right in a world that rewarded those who did wrong. In Vienna, he discovered Kessler's identity. He planned to expose him. Before he could act, Kessler struck, exposing Colonel Voss, who was subsequently murdered, and forcing the British to shut down their operation. And Dorrington was recalled? In disgrace, effectively. The failure was blamed on him, though the failure belonged to Kessler. Charles carried that guilt for the rest of his life. You said you knew Kessler. Do you know his real identity?" Brandt was silent for a long moment. The wind stirred the trees in the square, sending down a scatter of gold leaves. "I know who he was in Vienna," he said. "I do not know who he has become in London. But I know this. He is here. He has been here for years, and he killed Charles Dorrington to prevent the truth from emerging." "Tell me who he was." "In Vienna, Kessler was a doctor, a physician attached to the British legation. He used his medical practice as cover for his intelligence work, treating diplomats, their wives, their children. Everyone trusted him. No one suspects a doctor." The blood in my veins went cold. A doctor. A very good one by all accounts. Charming, capable, above suspicion. The perfect cover for a man who dealt in secrets and death. I stood. "I must find Poirot." "Yes," said Brandt. "You must. and quickly, because I believe the person Kessler has become is still practicing medicine, still trusted, still, as they say, above suspicion. I ran. I'm not ashamed to say it. Across the square, through the rain, back to our lodgings, where I found Poirot in his chair, a cup of tisane cooling at his elbow, his eyes closed in that appearance of repose that conceals the most furious activity of the little grey cells. "Poirot!" I gasped. "Greaves! Dr. Greaves! He's Kessler!" Poirot opened his eyes. His expression was not surprised. It was, if anything, sorrowful. "Yes, Hastings," he said quietly. "I have known since yesterday." "You've known?" "Since I examined his hands. In the consulting room. The scar, Hastings." Fenton described a fine scar running from the corner of the left eye to the cheekbone. Dr. Greaves has such a scar. He conceals it beneath his spectacles and the fold of his skin. But when he leaned forward under the desk lamp, I saw it. Then why didn't you? Because knowing is not proving, and because there is more to this affair than one man's guilt. The letter that vanished. Greaves removed it, yes. But not to protect himself. He removed it to protect someone else. Who? Poirot's face was very grave. That, mon ami, is what we shall discover tonight. I've invited the household of Eaton Square to assemble at 9 o'clock. Inspector Japp will be present, though he does not yet know why. And you, Hastings? You will do me the kindness of standing by the door and not allowing anyone to leave. The drawing room at number 14 Eaton Square had been arranged at Poirot's instruction, with the chairs in a semicircle facing the fireplace. A fire burned in the grate. Poirot had insisted upon it, though the evening was not cold. And the lamps had been lowered to a level that he described as sufficient for truth but merciful to the face. They were all there. Lady Dorrington, composed and watchful in her accustomed black. Fenton, standing behind her chair with the rigid loyalty of a soldier at his post. Dr. Greaves, who had arrived last and taken a chair slightly apart from the others, his massive frame somehow diminished, as though he had shrunk inside his skin. Inspector Japp, who stood by the mantelpiece with the studied nonchalance of a man who has been told to expect fireworks and is not sure whether to enjoy them or duck. And Helena Voss, seated near the window, her hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes fixed upon Poirot with an intensity that was almost painful. There was one other. Joseph Brandt, or whatever his true name was, had been admitted at Poirot's request and occupied a chair by the door, observing everything and everyone with the professional detachment of a man accustomed to watching from the wings. Poirot stood before the fire. He did not pace. He did not gesture. He stood perfectly still, and the stillness itself commanded attention. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he said. 6 weeks ago, Sir Charles Dorrington died in this house. The coroner ruled heart failure. The Foreign Office was satisfied. The newspapers moved on. And a murderer believed himself safe. He let the word settle. But Hercule Poirot, he does not accept what is convenient. He accepts only what is true. And the truth of Sir Charles's death is this: he was poisoned, slowly, methodically, over a period of weeks, with antimony administered in his evening tonic. The symptoms mimicked cardiac failure. The physician who treated him, the physician who prescribed the tonic into which the poison was introduced, saw only what the killer wished him to see. Greaves stirred. "I told you. Patience, doctor. We come to you presently." Poirot continued. The murder of Sir Charles Dorrington was not a crime of passion. It was not robbery, nor inheritance, nor domestic unhappiness. It was the final act of a story that began 23 years ago in Vienna, where a man who called himself Kessler betrayed the trust of 3 nations and caused the deaths of innocent men. Helena Voss drew a sharp breath. Lady Dorrington's eyes widened. "In Vienna," Poirot said, "Kessler operated as a double agent, or rather, a universal agent, selling information to anyone who would pay. His position gave him access to the intelligence networks of Britain, France, Austria, and Germany. He was responsible for the exposure of Colonel Friedrich Voss, he inclined his head to Helena, and for the collapse of the British intelligence operation, for which Sir Charles was unfairly blamed. Kessler's identity was discovered by Colonel Voss and by Sir Charles. Before they could act, Kessler struck. Voss was murdered. The British operation was shut down. Sir Charles was recalled in disgrace, and Kessler vanished. But he did not vanish entirely. He came to England. He changed his name, his profession, his appearance. He built a new life, a respectable life, a trusted life. He became, in fact, the very thing that had been his cover in Vienna. He became a doctor. Every eye in the room turned to Greaves. The physician sat motionless. His face was grey. The leonine confidence was gone, replaced by something I had not expected. Resignation. Not the resignation of a man caught in a lie, but the resignation of a man who has carried a burden too long and is almost grateful to set it down. "Dr. Greaves," Poirot said. "Or as you were known in Vienna, Dr. Karl Inselman." The name fell into silence. You served as physician to the British legation in Vienna from 1929 to 1934. You treated diplomats, their families, their staff. You were trusted absolutely. And you used that trust to gather and sell intelligence to anyone who would pay. Greaves, Inselman, closed his eyes. When your identity was discovered, you fled to England. You reinvented yourself as Ellsworth Greaves, established a Harley Street practice, and built a reputation that placed you beyond suspicion. You became Sir Charles Dorrington's personal physician, the very man you had betrayed. The audacity of it is almost admirable. For 15 years you treated him. You watched him age. You watched the guilt of Vienna consume him. And you waited, because a man who waits 15 years is a man who believes himself safe. But then Helena Voss came to London. You learned, through your old networks perhaps, or through simple observation, that she had contacted Sir Charles, that the past was stirring, that Charles, burdened by guilt and emboldened by retirement, had decided at last to tell the truth. And so you poisoned him. Slowly, carefully, in the manner you had perfected over a career of quiet killing. You introduced antimony into his tonic, a tonic that only you prescribed, that only you could alter without suspicion. You watched the symptoms develop and diagnosed them as the very cardiac failure you were causing. When Sir Charles began his letter to the Foreign Secretary, you knew you must act. You came to the house on the night of his death. Not through the window. That was the earlier visitor, the quarrel Lady Dorrington described. No, you came later, after midnight, admitted by a door you had used many times as the trusted physician. You entered the study, you found the letter, and you removed it. But you did not kill him that night with your own hands. The poison had already done its work. Sir Charles Dorrington died, as you had planned, of what appeared to be a natural failure of the heart. You removed the letter, you pronounced death, you signed the certificate, and you walked away, as you have always walked away, with the evidence in your pocket and the mask upon your face. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Greaves spoke. His voice was low, strained but steady. "You are wrong about one thing, Monsieur Poirot." "Indeed." "I did not come to the house after midnight. I was not there. I removed the letter the following morning, yes, when I was called to pronounce death. I saw it on the desk and I took it. But by then, Charles was already dead." "You admit to removing evidence." "I admit to protecting a secret. Not mine, or not only mine." He looked at Lady Dorrington. His expression was, and I struggled to find the right word, penitent. "I removed the letter because it would have exposed not only me but others, people who served in Vienna, people who made mistakes, people who are still alive and would be destroyed by the truth." "And the poison?" Poirot pressed. You prescribed the tonic. You had access. I prescribed the tonic. I did not poison it. Greaves leaned forward. Monsieur Poirot, I have done terrible things. In Vienna, I sold secrets. Men died because of me. I have lived with that knowledge for 23 years, but I did not kill Charles Dorrington. I could not. He was... His voice broke. He was the only man who ever showed me mercy. Mercy? In Vienna. When Charles discovered who I was, he did not expose me. He could have. It would have been justified. Instead, he came to me privately and said, "Leave, disappear. I will not be the one to destroy you, because I have seen what this work does to men, and I believe you can be better than what you have become." He gave me money. He gave me a false passport. He gave me a chance to begin again. And you repaid this mercy by becoming his physician. I repaid it by keeping him alive for 15 years. I monitored his heart. I treated his ailments. I watched over him, not as a killer, Monsieur Poirot, but as a guardian, the only penance I could offer. Then who, Poirot said very quietly, poisoned the tonic? The question turned every head in the room. Greaves looked stricken. Lady Dorrington had gone pale. Helena Voss sat rigid. Brant leaned forward in his chair, and Fenton, Arthur Fenton, the valet, the faithful servant, took one step backward toward the door. It was the step that betrayed him. Not a large movement, not a panicked flight. Just one step, the instinctive, unconscious retreat of a man who hears his name being called in a voice he cannot escape. Poirot turned to him. His face held no triumph, only a deep, immeasurable sadness. "Fenton," he said, "or as you were known in Vienna, Lieutenant Anton Fessler, Austrian military intelligence, colleague of Colonel Friedrich Voss, the man who disappeared after Voss was murdered, the man everyone assumed was dead." Fenton stood perfectly still. The professional composure was gone. In its place was something raw, ancient, a wound that had been covered for 20 years and was now, at last, exposed to the air. "You survived," Poirot said gently. "You changed your name, your nationality, your profession. You became English, perfectly English, with the patience and discipline of a man who has been trained in deception. You entered Sir Charles' household not as a killer, but as a watcher. You waited, as Kessler waited, but for a different reason. You waited for the moment when you could identify the man who betrayed your friend and destroyed your life. You discovered that Greaves was Enselman, was Kessler. Perhaps you overheard a conversation. Perhaps you found a document. It does not matter how. What matters is that you decided to act, not through the law, not through exposure, but through the same method Kessler had used in Vienna, through poison. You substituted the tonic. You had the key to the medicine cupboard. You had the knowledge. Austrian military intelligence trained its officers in toxicology. And you had the patience that only grief can teach a man. Fenton's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Friedrich Voss was more than my colleague," he said. "He was my brother, not by blood, by bond. We served together for 7 years. When he discovered Kessler's identity, he told me. We planned to expose him together, and then..." His voice cracked. "And then Friedrich was shot in the street like a dog, and I was hunted across 3 borders, and the man responsible..." His eyes went to Greaves with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "Was given a new life and a Harley Street practice and the gratitude of a man he had betrayed." "So you killed Sir Charles," I said, and immediately regretted it, for the words seemed too blunt for the weight of what they carried. "I killed the poison," Fenton said, "not the man. I meant to kill Greaves. I put the antimony in the tonic because I believed, I was told, that Greaves drank from it too, that he tested each batch before administering it. I was told this by..." He stopped. "By whom?" Poirot asked. Fenton's eyes moved slowly around the room. They settled on Joseph Brant. The man by the door did not flinch. He met Fenton's gaze with the calm of one who has been expecting this moment and is prepared for it. Monsieur Brant, Poirot said, or should I say, the real Kessler? The silence was absolute. You see, Poirot continued, his voice very soft, this is the cruelty at the heart of this affair. Dr. Greaves, Enselman, was not Kessler. He was a fool, a weak man who sold secrets for money and was given a second chance by the man he wronged. He was guilty of espionage, yes, but he was not the spider at the center of the web. The real Kessler was far more clever. He hid behind the name. He allowed others, Enselman, Fenton, even Sir Charles, to believe that Enselman was the traitor. And when the time came to silence Sir Charles, he did not act himself. He manipulated Fenton, a grieving man, burning with the need for justice, into poisoning the wrong target. Brant, Kessler, told Fenton that Greaves tasted the tonic. A lie. The poison went into Sir Charles, and Kessler's hands remained clean. Brant stood. His composure, that terrible professional detachment, was intact. You have no proof of this, Monsieur Poirot. I have the thread from Sir Charles's study window. Dark wool, continental tailoring, matching the coat you wear tonight. I have the button, also continental, torn from that coat during your quarrel with Sir Charles 3 nights before his death. I have the testimony of Fenton, who will confirm that you fed him the information that led to the poisoning. And I have this. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small folded paper. The letter Sir Charles was writing to the Foreign Secretary, the one Dr. Greaves removed from the desk. Greaves, in his misguided attempt to protect the past, kept it. He gave it to me this afternoon when I explained what he had unwittingly protected. He unfolded the paper and read aloud. I can no longer keep silent about what happened in Vienna. The man known as Kessler, whose betrayals caused the deaths of Colonel Voss and others, is not Dr. Karl Enselman, as I once believed. I was wrong. Enselman was a pawn. The true Kessler is a man who has been watching me for months from the garden square, who calls himself Joseph Brant, and whose real name is... The page ended there. The sentence was incomplete, but it was enough. Japp moved. Brant, Kessler, made one swift motion toward the door, but I was there, as Poirot had placed me, and my walking stick caught him across the shins with a force that surprised us both. He went down. Japp's constables, summoned from the hallway, were upon him in moments. As they lifted him, Kessler looked at Poirot with an expression that was, for the first and only time, unmasked. There was no charm in it, no calculation, only the naked fury of a man whose game has ended. You are a small man, Poirot, he said, a small fussy man with a mustache and an egg for a head. Poirot regarded him without rancor. And yet, monsieur, this small man has done what the intelligence services of 4 nations could not. He has found you. They took him away. The aftermath of such revelations is never tidy. Life does not arrange itself into neat conclusions, however much Poirot might wish it to. Fenton, Anton Fessler, was arrested. He had, after all, introduced the poison that killed Sir Charles, however misdirected his intention. Poirot, who can be as fierce in compassion as in justice, spent considerable time with Inspector Japp arguing for a charge of manslaughter rather than murder. The old soldier had been manipulated by a master manipulator. His grief had been weaponized. Whether the courts would show mercy remained to be seen. Dr. Greaves, Karl Enselman, surrendered himself to the authorities on charges of espionage. He was old, broken, and seemed almost relieved. The secrets of Vienna, kept so long and at such cost, had finally been laid upon a table where others could bear their weight. Helena Voss remained in London long enough to see Kessler committed for trial. I accompanied her to the station when she departed for the continent. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Tell Monsieur Poirot that Friedrich would have liked him. They share the same stubbornness and the same belief that order is possible in a disorderly world." Lady Dorrington bore the revelations with the fortitude I'd come to expect of her. She did not weep. Not in our presence. She thanked Poirot with a formality that concealed, I suspected, a depth of feeling she would not display before strangers. At the door, she paused. Charles was not a perfect man, she said. He kept secrets. He made errors of judgment. He trusted a spy and employed a killer without knowing it. But he was trying, at the end, to do the right thing. The letter he was writing, it was an act of courage. It was, madame, Poirot said. And it is the act, not the completion, that defines the man. She nodded once and closed the door. We walked home through the October evening. The rain had stopped at last, and the sky had cleared to reveal stars, pale and cold above the rooftops of London, indifferent as they have always been to the dramas enacted beneath them. A strange case, I said. All cases are strange, Hastings. It is the human heart that makes them so. Do you pity Fenton? Poirot walked in silence for several steps. I pity the man who loved his friend so deeply that he became the instrument of an enemy's design. Yes, I pity him, but pity does not erase consequence. A man is dead. The wrong man, killed by the wrong hand, for the wrong reason. And the architect of it all, Kessler, he merely watched from a bench in a garden square, reading a newspaper he never turned. It's monstrous. It is the nature of evil, mon ami. It does not always wield the knife itself. Sometimes it merely whispers to the hand that does. We turned into our street. The lamps were lit, casting pools of gold upon the wet pavement. Through the window of our lodgings, I could see the warm glow of Mrs. Lemon's fire and the silhouette of the chair where Poirot would sit and think and wait for the next bell to ring. Poirot, I said. The letter. Sir Charles was about to write Kessler's real name. You read it. Do you know it? Poirot's moustache twitched. The letter was incomplete, Hastings. The name was never written. But you deduced it. I deduced it from other evidence. The thread, the button, the scar, the pattern of behavior. What is his real name? Poirot stopped walking. He looked up at the stars, those cold, distant witnesses, and then at me, with an expression I had never seen before. It was not satisfaction, nor triumph, nor even the intellectual pleasure he usually derives from the completion of a case. It was weariness, the weariness of a man who has looked into a depth and found it deeper than he wished. His name does not matter, Hastings. He will stand trial under the name the world knows. What matters is this, that for 23 years a man sat in a garden and watched the house of the man he had destroyed, not to kill him, but to ensure that no one else brought him justice. Kessler did not want Sir Charles dead. He wanted him silent. He wanted the secret preserved. When silence was no longer possible, he arranged for someone else to do the killing and someone else to take the blame. That is the coldest thing I have ever heard. It is the coldest thing I have ever encountered, Poirot said, and I have encountered much. We went inside. The fire was lit. The coffee was prepared. And Poirot, settling into his chair with the particular sigh of a man whose labors are, for the moment concluded, said, "There is one consolation, Hastings." "What is that?" "Lady Dorrington asked me to find the truth. I found it. It was not the truth she wanted. It is never the truth anyone wants, but it was the truth. And in the end, mon ami, that is the only gift Hercule Poirot can offer. Not comfort, not justice, precisely, but the truth laid upon the table like a card that cannot be denied." He closed his eyes. The fire crackled. The rain, which had held off for the walk home, began again, softly, persistently, as though London itself were determined to wash the day clean and begin again. I sat opposite him for a long time, listening to the rain and the fire and the silence of a man whose little grey cells had done their extraordinary work and were, at last, at rest. Outside, the city went about its business. Taxis hummed. A dog barked once and was still. Somewhere, in a cell, a man who had traded in secrets for a quarter of a century sat alone with the knowledge that a small, fussy Belgian with an egg-shaped head had done what empires could not. And somewhere, in a house in Eaton Square, a woman in black sat at a desk where her husband had tried to write a letter and finished it for him, in her own hand, in her own words, addressed not to the Foreign Secretary, but to the man himself, wherever the dead go to read.